Welcome to True Crime Cases, where we delve into the darkest corners of human nature. Stephen and Amara had always seemed like the perfect couple. They lived in a lovely house in a quiet suburb, where neighbors smiled and waved as they walked by. People looked at Stephen and Amara and saw two people who had it all: good jobs, a nice home, and a marriage that appeared as happy as ever. Stephen was a well-known architect in town, someone people trusted to design their dream homes. He worked hard sometimes, too hard, staying late at the office to make sure his projects were perfect. Amara was an event planner, the kind of person who brought excitement wherever she went. She was always the life of the party, able to turn any occasion into something special, so people naturally loved having her around. With Stephen's 36th birthday just a few weeks away, Amara decided to throw him a surprise party. She wanted it to be unforgettable, a celebration that Stephen and all their friends would remember for years. Amara had big plans for the party, planning every little detail with the same skill she used for her clients. She organized the food, decorations, music, and even some games. She was determined to make sure everything was perfect. So she was busier than ever, but things felt different between Stephen and Amara lately. It wasn't something either of them had spoken about, but it lingered in the air, a feeling that was hard to ignore. Stephen had noticed that Amara seemed distant. He figured maybe it was the party, planning, or stress from work. Still, deep down, he couldn't help but wonder if something else was going on. Amara was often away running errands or meeting up with friends, sometimes coming home late, without much of an explanation. Stephen tried not to overthink it. After all, he trusted her, but he also couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. One person who would be attending the party was Dr. Travis, a family friend, and Amara's close acquaintance. Dr. Travis was a respected doctor in town, known for his kindness and dedication to his patients. People admired him, and he had a way of making everyone feel comfortable. He was charming and friendly, the type of person who everyone enjoyed talking to. Over time, he had become friends with Stephen and Amara. He would sometimes stop by for dinner or meet up with Amara for coffee, especially when Stephen was busy with work. Stephen didn't think much of Amara's friendship with Dr. Travis. At first, he trusted her, and besides, he was too busy with his demanding job to focus on such things. But now, with Amara's unusual behavior, he started to wonder. He noticed small things like how Amara would smile a little more when Dr. Travis's name came up, or how she would always take extra care to look her best whenever she planned to see him. Stephen brushed it off, trying to convince himself that it was just his imagination, and he had no reason to doubt Amara. But he couldn't deny the pang of worry that crept up every time he thought about it. The party day finally arrived, and their home was buzzing with excitement. Amara had transformed their backyard into a magical place with string lights, colorful decorations, and tables filled with food and drinks. Guests started arriving, friends and family members who were eager to celebrate Stephen's big day. Stephen was touched by all the effort Amara had put into the party. He was thrilled to see everyone and excited for a night to remember. Dr. Travis arrived a little later than most, dressed sharply and greeting everyone with a friendly smile. Amara's face lit up when she saw him, and she hurried over to welcome him. Stephen watched from a distance as they talked, noticing how Amara seemed almost too happy to see him. His stomach churned, but he tried to ignore it. He reminded himself that it was just a party and that Amara was just excited to see all their friends together. The evening continued with laughter, music, and delicious food. People toasted to Stephen, sharing funny stories and heartfelt words. Amara was all smiles, moving between guests, checking that everything was going as planned. Stephen tried to relax, but he kept glancing over at Amara and Dr. Travis, who seemed to be spending more time together than he was comfortable with. They were always just a little too close, sharing quiet laughter, leaning in as if they had a secret no one else knew. As the night went on, Stephen felt a growing unease. He had always trusted Amara, but tonight something felt different. He couldn't ignore a nagging feeling that something important was hidden beneath the surface, something he hadn't yet discovered. He didn't want to believe it, didn't want to think about what it could mean if he was right. But deep down, he knew that things between him and Amara were about to change. Whether it was his imagination or something real, tonight felt like the beginning of a revelation, one that might just turn his world upside down. And as the party went on, with laughter ringing out and people celebrating, Stephen couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a birthday. Party. It was the start of something he couldn't yet see but knew he couldn't ignore after the excitement of his surprise birthday. Party. Stephen expected things would go back to normal. But instead the strange feeling that something was wrong only grew stronger. Amara seemed more distant than ever, and it wasn't just when they were around other people. Even when it was just the two of them, there was a coldness about her that Stephen couldn't ignore. She still smiled and laughed, but it felt different, almost like she was putting on a show. He tried to tell himself that maybe she was just tired or stressed, but deep down he couldn't shake the sense that she was hiding something from him. Over the next few weeks, Stephen began to notice that Amara was out of the house more often than usual. She always had a reason, an extra work meeting, an errand that couldn't wait, or a last-minute meetup with a friend. Stephen wanted to trust her. After all, Amara was his wife, the person he'd shared so much of his life with. But every time she left, he felt a knot of worry form in his stomach. He tried to brush it off, telling himself that he was being silly or overthinking things, but the nagging feeling refused to go away. Stephen started paying closer attention, even if he didn't really want to admit it. He noticed small things like how Amara would take extra care in her appearance. Before going out, she'd spend more time in front of the mirror adjusting her hair, or choosing a specific outfit that seemed a little too fancy for just running errands. And when she'd leave, there was often a hint of excitement in her expression, a spark in her eyes that Stephen hadn't seen in a while. It was like she was going to do something thrilling, something that made her happier than anything they'd done together recently. Whenever Amara returned home, she acted like nothing was out of the ordinary, but Stephen felt like he was looking at a stranger. She'd smile, give him a quick kiss, and ask about his day, but there was a wall between them. It was as if she had a secret that she didn't want him to know. Stephen knew he could ask her directly, but part of him was scared of what she might say. He wanted to believe that there was a simple explanation, but his gut told him that things were far more complicated than there was. Dr. Travis. Stephen knew that Dr. Travis and Amara had become friends through community events and mutual friends. Dr. Travis had always seemed like a nice, trustworthy person, someone who was respected and well-liked. Stephen hadn't thought much of it when Amara would occasionally mention having coffee with Dr. Travis or running into him around town. But lately his name came up more often, and always with that same spark of excitement in Amara's eyes. It was like she couldn't help but smile whenever she talked about him. One afternoon, as Stephen sat alone in his quiet office, his mind started connecting the dots. He thought about the party, remembering how Amara had lit up when Dr. Travis arrived, how they had shared those quiet laughs and private smiles. And then he thought about all the times Amara had left the house with that look of anticipation, as if she were on her way to something or someone that brought her real happiness. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. His heart sank as he realized what he'd been trying to avoid. Amara might be seeing Dr. Travis in ways that went far beyond simple friendship. Stephen's mind raced, and he felt a mixture of anger, confusion, and hurt. Why would Amara do this to him? They had shared so much together, built a life, a home, and a future. He thought she was happy, or at least content. But now he began to see that maybe Amara had felt something was missing all along, and she turned to Dr. Travis to fill that gap. The idea of it twisted in his chest, making him feel betrayed and foolish for not noticing sooner. The worst part was that Stephen couldn't talk to anyone about it. How could he bring up something like this to his friends or family without solid proof? It would only lead to more questions, more doubts, and he wasn't ready to face that just yet. Instead, he kept his feelings to himself, pretending like everything was normal when inside he was filled with suspicion and pain. As the days went on, Stephen tried to confront Amara about where she was going, but every time he opened his mouth to ask, he'd stop himself. He wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. He feared that if he asked, she might tell him the truth, and he wasn't sure he could handle hearing it. Instead, he watched her leave, each time feeling more alone and disconnected from the woman he thought knew so well. One evening, as Stephen sat alone at the dinner table, Amara walked in cheerful and lively, as if she just had the best day. She told him she'd met up with an old friend. But something about the way she said it didn't sit right with him. He nodded, pretending to believe her, but inside he felt his suspicions grow stronger. Stephen didn't know how much longer he could keep pretending. The more he watched Amara, the clearer it became that she was hiding a part of her life from him, a part that, no matter how much he wanted to ignore, he couldn't escape. For Stephen, each day became a painful waiting game. He didn't know what he was waiting for, whether it was for Amara to tell him the truth or for himself to find the courage to confront her. He only knew that things couldn't go on like this forever. He loved Amara, but love didn't feel like enough when secrets hung between them like shadows casting a darkness he couldn't ignore. The night of Stephen's big surprise party had finally arrived, and Amara had transformed their home into a magical place. String lights glittered across the backyard, casting a warm, welcoming glow. Tables were filled with delicious food from appetizers to desserts, each arranged perfectly. Amara had planned every detail, and the place looked like a scene from a magazine. Friends and family members arrived, each one shouting surprise as they saw Stephen, making him laugh and blush as he tried to take it all in. Stephen could hardly believe the work Amara had put into the party just for him. For a moment he felt all his worries melt away, replaced by the happiness of being surrounded by people he cared about. The evening was everything anyone could want from a party. People shared funny stories about Stephen, teasing him about his habits and quirks. Laughter filled the air, and everyone seemed genuinely happy to Bether as he moved through the crowd. People raised their glasses to toast him, ache with their own kind words and memories despite his earlier worries. Stephen found himself relaxing, letting his guard down and enjoying the party that Amara had worked so hard to organize. After all, he reminded himself, Amara must still care about him if she'd gone to all this trouble. Then, just as the toasts were winding down, Dr. Travis arrived. Stephen noticed him standing at the edge of the crowd, flashing a smile that seemed just a little too confident. Amara's face lit up when she saw him, and she immediately made her way over to greet him. Stephen watched as she leaned in close, whispering something to Dr. Travis that made him chuckle. They looked comfortable together, almost like they shared a secret. Stephen felt his stomach clench, but he tried to ignore it. Dr. Travis was an old friend, he told himself, and maybe he was just being paranoid. As the night went on, Stephen couldn't help but notice the small moments between Amara and Dr. Travis. At one point he saw them talking by the buffet table, standing a bit closer than necessary, laughing softly as if they had some private joke. Amara's face was flushed with excitement, and her eyes sparkled in a way Stephen hadn't seen in a long time. Dr. Travis leaned in, saying something quietly, and Amara laughed again, looking almost like a different person, carefree, relaxed, and completely at ease. Stephen's smile faded, and he quickly looked away, hoping no one else had noticed the pang of worry in his expression. But try as he might, he couldn't stop watching. Every time he looked there, they were sharing another smile, another laugh, as if they had their own little world within the party, and each time Stephen saw them together, he felt his chest tighten. It wasn't that anyone else seemed to notice anything unusual to most people. It probably just looked like two friends catching up, but to Stephen it felt like more. It felt like he was seeing something he wasn't supposed to see. Stephen moved from group to group, chatting with friends and pretending to enjoy himself, but his mind kept drifting back to Amara, and Dr. Travis could feel the unease building inside him. A storm he was trying to keep hidden. Part of him wanted to confront Amara, toast her what was going on, but another part of him was afraid of what she might say. He wasn't ready to face the truth, especially not here in front of all their friends and family. So he kept quiet, holding on to his suspicions and hoping that maybe he was just imagining things. As the evening went on, the tension inside Stephen grew. He found himself standing alone by the kitchen, watching as Amara and Dr. Travis laughed at something, their heads close together, unaware of his gaze. It felt like everything around him was moving in slow motion, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses fading into the background. He watched as Amara reached out, lightly touching Dr. Travis's arm, a gesture so small and quick that most people wouldn't even notice. But Stephen noticed, and in that moment his suspicions felt almost like facts. Still, he said nothing. He didn't want to ruin the party, didn't want to confront her here in front of everyone. He didn't even know what he'd say, and he didn't want to believe that something could actually be going on between his wife and Dr. Travis. He told himself he was just overreacting, letting his insecurities get the best of him. After all, Amara had thrown this entire party just for him. Surely if she didn't care, she wouldn't have done all this. But deep down, Stephen knew that something was wrong. No matter how much he tried to ignore it, the feeling wouldn't go away. It was like a weight pressing down on him. a heavy cloud that darkened the happiness he'd felt earlier. He realized that for all the smiles and laughter around him, he felt completely alone. Everyone else was celebrating, enjoying the party, but Stephen was stuck. In his own world of doubt and suspicion, finally Stephen decided he needed some air. He slipped away from the crowd, stepping out onto the quiet back porch where he could be alone with his thoughts. The cool night air hit his face, and he took a deep breath, trying to clear his mind. He stood there for a while, staring out into the darkness, feeling the weight of everything he'd seen and felt that night. He couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was going on, and he was afraid to find out what it was as he looked. Back at the house, he saw Amara laughing with their friends, her face bright and joyful as if she didn't have a care in the world. And for the first time, Stephen wondered if he even knew her at all. Standing on the quiet back porch, Stephen felt his mind race. As he pieced together everything he'd seen, it wasn't just his imagination, he was sure of it now. The looks, the laughs, the way Amara acted around Dr. Travis. It all felt too familiar. Too close, like something more than just friendship. It hit him hard, and he felt a strange mixture of anger and sadness. His heart heavy with the realization CLCLA, the woman he loved, was hiding something, and the truth was staring him right in the face. It was too painful to ignore any longer. For a moment, Stephen just stood there, feeling like the ground had fallen out from beneath him. He thought back to all the times Amara had been distant, the time she'd left the house without much of an explanation, and the excuses she'd given for spending time with Dr. Travis Olof. It had seemed like small, unimportant details at the time, but now they added up to something much bigger and much worse. She was having an affair with Dr. Travis. There was no other way to explain it. Stephen clenched his fists, feeling anger bubbling up inside him. How could she do this? They had built a life together, shared years of memories, and now on his birthday he was realizing she'd been unfaithful. He felt betrayed and humiliated, like he'd been living a lie. And now all their friends and family were here celebrating, unaware of the secret Amara was hiding. He looked back through the window, watching Amara laughing with a group of friends, her face bright and cheerful as if nothing was wrong. But Stephen knew better. He knew that her smile was hiding something, and he couldn't stand to let her keep pretending. Part of him wanted to storm into the room and demand answers, to tell everyone right then and there what he had just realized. It would be the ultimate twist of birthday gift. Amara would never forget. Stephen took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the anger only grew. He thought of how everyone in the room admired Amara, how they saw her as the perfect wife who had thrown this incredible party for him. But they didn't know that truth. They didn't know that she had been meeting Dr. Travis in secret, spending time with him in ways she should have only spent with her husband. Stephen felt a flash of determination. He was going to reveal everything. He couldn't keep the secret, not anymore. With his heart pounding, he walked back into the house, his eyes fixed on Amara. She was laughing, completely unaware that he was watching her, with a look of betrayal in his eyes. She made his way through the crowd, his men set on one thing: exposing Amara's secret right here, right now. His anger fueled his steps, and he felt a strange sense of power, knowing he was about to turn the party upside down. Just as he raked the middle of the room, someone handed him a glass, raising it for a toast. It was one of his closest friends, who didn't realize what Stephen was about to do to Stephen. His friend cheered, and the whole room joined in, lifting their glasses and cheering for him for the birthday they thought was a celebration of happiness and love. Stephen looked around, seeing all the smiling faces, the friends and family who had come here to support him, but his eyes kept coming back to Amara. She looked at him with a warm smile, like she was proud of him, but he could see through it now. Her smile felt like a mask hiding the truth. He couldn't take it anymore. The betrayal was too much, and he needed to let it out. He raised his own glass, feeling everyone's eyes on him, the room going quiet as they waited for him to speak. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what he was about to say. "Thank you all for coming here tonight," he began. His voice is steady but filled with tension. "It means a lot to me to be surrounded by friends and family, to celebrate with people I care about." He paused, looking directly at Amara, who still had that same unsuspecting smile. "But tonight isn't just about celebrating," he continued, his voice hardening. "It's about honesty, and it's about trust." People glanced at each other, sensing something was off. Amara's smile faded, a flicker of confusion crossing her face as she watched him. Stephen held her gaze, the hurt and betrayal clear in his eyes. "I have to say There's one person here who deserves special recognition, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Dr. Travis, thank you for being such a close friend to my wife. The room fell silent, the air thick with shock and confusion. Dr. Travis's face went pale and Amara's eyes widened in horror as she realized what Stephen was saying. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The guests looked around, murmuring as the reality of Stephen's words began to sink in. Stephen felt a strange satisfaction as he watched the looks of shock and disbelief spread across the room. Amara tried to step forward, her face filled with panic and guilt. But Stephen shook his head. No, Amara, he said, his voice filled with hurt. I think you've said enough. The room was tense, filled with whispers and gasps as people realized what had happened. The party, which had once been filled with laughter and joy, was now quiet and uncomfortable. Everyone looking at Amara and Dr. Travis with a mix of sympathy and judgment. Stephen didn't stay to see what happened next. He turned and walked out, leaving Amara standing there stunned and speechless with her secret now exposed for everyone to see. As he stepped into the cool night air, Stephen felt a strange sense of relief mixed with sadness. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. His life had changed forever and there was no going back. As Stephen walked out into the night air, the stunned silence he left behind quickly turned into a whirlwind of whispers and gasps. People looked at each other, still trying to process what they just heard. Amara stood frozen, her face pale and eyes wide with horror, as she realized her secret was now out in the open. Everything she'd tried so hard to hide was shattered with just a few words. She looked around, seeing the shocked faces of friends and family, and felt the weight of their judgment. The guests stood awkwardly, not knowing where to look or what to say. Finally, someone broke the silence with a nervous cough, and then people began murmuring, their voices rising as they discussed what had just happened. Some looked at Amara with pity, while others stared at her in disbelief and disappointment. Amara's heart pounded, her face turning red as she felt their yes on her. She tried to steady herself, but her mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do or say. Dr. Travis, who had been standing near the back, took a hesitant step forward. His face was pale, and he looked around uncomfortably, clearly realizing the impact of what had just been revealed. He tried to catch Amara's eye, but she wouldn't look at him. He knew he couldn't hide forever. People were already looking at him, whispering to each other. Some of Stephen's friends glared at him, their eyes filled with anger. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He felt cornered, trapped by the consequences of his own actions. Then Amara finally moved, her face twisted with a mixture of shame and desperation. She looked around at the faces of her friends and family, the people who had once respected her, and felt a pang of regret so sharp it made her heart ache. She wished she could turn back time, that she could somehow undo everything, but she knew it was too late. Stephen had exposed her secret, and now there was no hiding. Just then someone in the crowd spoke up, breaking the thick silence. Is it true, Amara? It was one of her closest friends, looking at her with a mix of sadness and disappointment. Amara opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, another voice shouted from across the room. How could you do this to Stephen? This time it was one of Stephen's family members, who looked hurt and angry, as if she too had been betrayed. The questions kept coming, each one louder than the last. Amara felt overwhelmed, her hands shaking as she tried to defend herself. Thanks for watching True Crime Cases.